I never used to believe in ghosts. I was always the skeptical one, rolling my eyes whenever someone mentioned a haunted place or a paranormal encounter. But one chilly autumn evening, my life changed forever. It happened on Willow Trail, a popular hiking spot in my town, known for its serene beauty during the day and eerie silence at night. That trail has a dark history, though. They say a woman named Evelyn disappeared there years ago, and her body was never found. Some locals whisper that her spirit still roams the trail, searching for answers. I used to think those stories were just small town gossip meant to keep kids from wandering into the woods after dark. But now, I know better. What I experienced on that trail was something I can never unsee, and I still hear her voice in my nightmares. The first story, The Ghost of Willow Trail, it started like any other evening. I had just gotten off work and decided to go for a hike to clear my head. The air was crisp, the kind that makes you feel alive, and the forest was painted in shades of orange and red from the falling leaves. I always loved hiking, especially during sunset when the light filters through the trees and everything feels peaceful. Willow Trail was quiet that evening. Too quiet, now that I think about it. No birds chirping, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my boots crunching on the dirt path. I brushed it off as one of those calm nights in the woods. About 20 minutes in, I noticed the sun was setting faster than usual, casting long, dark shadows across the trail. Still, I kept walking. I had done this trail dozens of times and could navigate it with my eyes closed. But then I saw her. At first it was just a glimpse, a figure standing off the trail, partially hidden behind a tree. My heart skipped a beat, but I told myself it was probably another hiker. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty woods. No response. The figure didn't move. I squinted, trying to make out the shape in the fading light. It looked like a woman in a long dress, her hair hanging loosely over her shoulders. Something about her stance sent a chill down my spine. She was too still, like a statue carved out of shadow. I shook my head, convincing myself I was just tired. "Must have been a tree branch," I muttered under my breath. I quickened my pace, eager to finish the trail and head home. That's when I heard it. A soft whispering sound. It was faint at first, like the wind brushing through the leaves, but it grew louder with every step I took. It wasn't random noise. It was a voice. A woman's voice. And she was calling my name. "David?" I froze. My blood turned to ice. No one knew I was here. I hadn't told anyone I was coming to the trail. I turned around, scanning the woods, but there was no one there. The whisper came again, closer this time. "David, help me." I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were glued to the ground. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her again. The same woman, standing in the middle of the trail about 10 feet behind me. Only now, I could see her face. Her eyes were hollow, dark pits, and her mouth was twisted into an expression of pain. She reached out a hand, her fingers unnaturally long, and took a step toward me. Panic took over. I turned and bolted down the trail, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. I didn't look back, not even when I felt the temperature drop around me or heard her voice screaming my name. It wasn't until I reached the trailhead gasping for air that I dared to glance over my shoulder. She was gone. After that night on Willow Trail, I thought I'd never step foot in the woods again. The terror I felt, seeing that woman's hollow eyes, haunted me every time I closed my eyes. But life has a way of forcing you to move on. And after a few weeks, I started to feel like I could face the world again. One evening, while hanging out with some friends, I made a decision that would lead me into even darker territory. My friends had heard about the incident on Willow Trail. At first, they didn't believe me, chalking it up to an overactive imagination or fatigue. But when they saw how shaken I was, they urged me to face my fear and join them on a night adventure. We decided to drive to Hollow Creek Bridge, a place known for its eerie reputation. The locals had been whispering about the place for years. It wasn't far from town, just a small run-down bridge spanning a creek that no one dared cross after dusk. I had heard the rumors before. People claimed they saw strange lights flickering around the bridge at night, or shadows moving when there was no wind. Some even said a figure dressed in old-fashioned clothing appeared near the creek, staring at anyone who dared to approach. At first, I brushed it off, thinking it was just another one of those stories to scare tourists. But as we made our way toward the bridge that evening, I couldn't shake the sense of unease creeping into my bones. The trees surrounding the area were thick, their branches twisted like the fingers of a giant hand. The night was too quiet, just the sound of our car tires crunching over the gravel road and the occasional rustle of leaves. We parked a little ways from the bridge, the headlights illuminating the path ahead. We were the only ones there, or so we thought. My friends laughed nervously, trying to lighten the mood. But I could feel something watching us from the shadows. "All right, David, time to face your fears," one of them joked, nudging me. "You're not scared of some old bridge, are you?" I forced a smile, though my hands were clammy. "No way, let's go." The story of the phantom. We all stepped out of the car, and the chill of the night air hit us immediately. I shivered involuntarily. The bridge was old, its wooden planks creaking underfoot as we made our way closer. The creek below was barely visible in the dim light, but I could hear the water flowing beneath us, its gurgling sound strangely soothing. As we reached the middle of the bridge, we stopped. The air felt thick, as if something was weighing it down, but I couldn't put my finger on it. My friends were laughing, making jokes, taking photos, trying to make the situation feel lighter. But I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Something was wrong. "Let's go to the other side," one of my friends suggested, eager to explore further. "We'll be able to see the whole creek from over there." As we turned to leave the bridge, I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by one of the trees or the low-hanging fog. But no, this wasn't normal. A figure stood on the far side of the bridge, motionless, staring at us. It was a woman, dressed in a flowing white gown, her hair falling around her shoulders like a dark veil. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, but her eyes were what caught me. They were wide, unblinking, and they shone in the dark as if they were reflecting light, though there was none. "Who's that?" my friend asked, turning toward the figure. No one answered. My stomach churned, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. The woman didn't move. She just stood there, watching us, her presence sending an icy wave over me. "Maybe she's lost," another friend suggested, though there was no real conviction in her voice. We started to walk toward the woman, and that's when the air grew colder. The fog around us thickened, swallowing up the moonlight. It felt like we were being pulled into another world, one where time didn't exist. I glanced back at the bridge. But when I looked forward again, the woman was gone. Where did she go? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. She must have run off, one of my friends said, shrugging. Maybe she's just some weirdo out here at night. But I wasn't convinced. Something wasn't right. We continued walking, though now there was an urgency to our steps. My heart hammered in my chest, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. We reached the other side of the bridge, but when we looked back, that's when we saw it. The woman was standing at the far end of the bridge again, only this time, she wasn't still. She was moving, but in a way that didn't make sense. Her body jerked unnaturally, like someone was pulling her strings. Her limbs moving in a disjointed, robotic manner. Then she stopped, her head tilted to one side, and her mouth slowly opened. The sound that came from her wasn't a voice. It was a low, guttural noise, like someone was trying to speak but could barely form words. Don't come close, she whispered. Each word stretched out, as if it was being dragged through the air. The fear hit me like a wave, knocking the wind out of me. I grabbed my friends and yanked them back toward the car. We ran without looking back. My heart pounded in my chest as we scrambled to the safety of the vehicle, doors slamming shut behind us. I could feel the weight of the woman's eyes on me, even as we drove away. Conclusion of the second story. Segue to next segment. We never spoke of Hollow Creek Bridge again. After that night, none of us dared to go near it. What I saw that night, what we all saw, wasn't human. It wasn't a prank or hallucination. It was something else. And the worst part, I don't think it was just the bridge she haunted. I think she followed us. I know what you're thinking. It could have been a trick of the mind, the darkness playing tricks on you. But deep down, I know the truth. Hollow Creek Bridge isn't just a haunted place. It's a gateway to something far worse. And now, after everything I've experienced, I can't help but wonder if there's something else lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next person to make the same mistake we did. But that's a story for another time. Because the next one will make your skin crawl. After the Hollow Creek Bridge incident, I promised myself I'd never get involved in another so-called haunted place adventure. But life, as always, had different plans. This time, it wasn't curiosity or peer pressure that led me to Ravenwood Park. It was desperation. I had just moved to a small town for work, and Ravenwood Park was the only shortcut to my office. The locals warned me about it. Stay away from Ravenwood after dark, they said. That place is cursed. At first, I thought it was just a superstition, like the stories I'd heard before. But I didn't have much of a choice. Taking the long route would add almost an hour to my commute, and I couldn't afford to be late. So, one foggy evening, I made the decision to cut through Ravenwood Park. It was a sprawling forest trail with thick trees that seemed to press in from all sides, their branches twisting together like skeletal hands. The path was dimly lit by a few flickering lampposts, but the deeper I went, the darker it seemed to get. The encounter begins. The first few minutes were uneventful. The gravel crunched under my boots, and the distant chirping of crickets filled the air. I kept telling myself, it's just another park. There's nothing here but trees and shadows. But the deeper I ventured, the quieter it became. The crickets stopped chirping. The wind died down. Even the sound of my footsteps seemed to fade, swallowed by the oppressive silence. And then I heard it, a faint whisper. It wasn't coming from any direction I could pinpoint. It seemed to surround me, like the trees themselves were murmuring secrets. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the whispers grew louder, more distinct. Turn back. I froze in place, my breath hitching in my throat. The voice was soft, almost pleading, but it sent a chill down my spine. I looked around, but there was no one in sight. The path ahead was empty, and the trees cast long skeletal shadows across the ground. Turn back. The voice came again, this time closer, almost as if it was right beside me. My heart pounded in my chest as I quickened my pace, determined to reach the other side of the park as quickly as possible. But with every step I took, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The shadows appear, that's when I saw them. The shadows. At first, I thought they were just tricks of the light, the flickering lampposts casting strange shapes on the ground. But as I walked, the shadows began to move. Against the light, against the wind, against all logic. They weren't human-shaped. They were long, stretched, and distorted, like figures trapped in a nightmare. They danced across the trees, slithering up the trunks and twisting around the branches, and they were getting closer. I broke into a run, my footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. The whispers turned into hisses, a cacophony of voices overlapping each other. I couldn't make out the words anymore, but I didn't need to. The meaning was clear. I wasn't welcome here. Suddenly, one of the shadows darted across the path in front of me. It moved with unnatural speed, a blur of darkness that made my stomach drop. I stumbled to a halt, my breath coming in ragged gasps. That's when I saw it, a figure standing just ahead, partially obscured by the shadows. The figure in the fog. It was tall and impossibly thin, its body barely more than a silhouette. Its head was tilted to the side as if studying me. And then it stepped forward into the dim light of the nearest lamppost. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. The figure wasn't human. Its skin was a sickly gray, stretched taut over its bones. Its eyes were hollow pits, blacker than the shadows around it. And its mouth? Its mouth was too wide, stretching into a grotesque grin filled with jagged teeth. It didn't move like a person. It jerked forward in short, unnatural bursts, its limbs bending at odd angles. With every step it took, the shadows around it seemed to writhe and reach out toward me. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but my body wouldn't move. It was as if the very air around me had turned to stone, trapping me in place. The figure raised one long, bony finger and pointed directly at me. "Leave," it rasped, its voice a guttural growl that echoed through the silence. The escape, that single word, snapped me out of my paralysis. I turned and ran as fast as my legs would carry me, not caring where I was going as long as it was away from that thing. The shadows seemed to follow me, darting across the path and reaching for my ankles. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to blur. The world around me a chaotic swirl of darkness and fire. At some point, I tripped and fell, scraping my hands on the gravel. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Finally I saw it, the edge of the park. The street lights beyond the trees were like beacons of hope, guiding me to safety. I burst out of the forest and collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for air. When I looked back, the park was silent and still, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Something was in there. Something that didn't belong in our world. Conclusion of the third story. Segue to the final segment. I never went back to Ravenwood Park after that night. I even moved to a different town, far away from the woods and their cursed trails. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I still hear the whispers. I don't know what it was I encountered that night. A ghost? A demon? Something older? Something darker? All I know is that it's out there, waiting for the next unlucky soul to cross its path. And if you ever find yourself walking through a park at night, and the shadows start to move, and the whispers start to call, turn back, because some places were never meant to be crossed.